the power of process and organization with today's special guest, Joe Casabona. Today's episode is brought to you by the bestseller ChatGPT Profits. This book is the missing instruction manual to get you up and running with ChatGPT in a matter of minutes. As a special gift, you can get it absolutely free at artificialintelligencepod.com/gift or at the link right below this episode. Make sure to grab your copy before it goes back up to full price. Are you tired of dealing with your boss? Do you feel underpaid and underappreciated? If you want to make it online, fire your boss, and start living your retirement dreams now, then you come to the right place. Welcome to the Artificial Intelligence Podcast Show, where you will learn how to use artificial intelligence to open new revenue streams and make money while you sleep. Presented live from a tropical island in the South Pacific by best-selling author Jonathan Green. Now, here's your host. Now, I'm really excited by what you do because the most significant things I've done in my business are always the boringest. It's always process, which I hate, and spreadsheets, which I hate. But it always moves the needle the most because the one thing you can never get more of is time. And what I really want to start with is, since your focus is help people with podcasts, and people often want to jump to automation, but I always say you can't automate until you know the process. Because taking a bad process and making it faster won't help anything. But what do you think your episode is, why do so many podcasts fail? Because a lot of podcasts do 3 episodes, 6 episodes, so few make it to 50 or 100 episodes. What do you think is the biggest reason they fail? I know my feeling is like expectation. What they think is going to happen is so different from what actually happens. So what do you think from your experience?
I think it's that, but then there's also, okay, I'm a huge baseball fan, right? I'm like wearing a Yankee shirt right now. You have guys watching at home and they're critiquing Aaron Judge or soon to be Juan Soto. How could you miss that pitch? Why would you swing at that? And it's because they don't understand that the game is mostly about anticipation, and the guys that you see at that level just make it look so easy. And so you see podcasters like Joe Rogan, however you feel about him, Conan and Dak Shepard and Amy Porterfield, and a bunch of people who are being really successful at podcasting, and all they do is talk to people, right? And so I think that there's the expectation that this is going to be easy. I'm just going to have conversations and I'll just release them and then I'll start making money. And then they get into it and they're like, oh my God, I just talked to this person for an hour and now I need to edit or at least put it together and then upload it and come up with a description. And 3 people listened and one was me and one was my mom. This isn't worth it. And I think there's that the level of effort, the expectation for the level of effort is so much lower than it actually is.
That's a really good point. How much time for every hour that you're on mic do you think you have to put into your podcast? What's the ratio of on mic to off mic time to make a podcast work?
This is a great question because I've heard the ratio is 4-to-1. So for every minute of finished content, you put in 4 minutes, which means that if you have an hour-long episode, it's going to be 4 hours. It's maybe a little bit more than that when you take into account that you should spend as much time marketing something as you took making it. So if I want people to listen, it's going to take me 4 hours to market it or put it out there, right? But that 4-to-1 ratio is when I've time tracked and I've done everything myself, that kind of rang true to me. I'm a bad editor, so it takes me longer to edit. And I'm also like a little bit too much of a perfectionist, which is why I have somebody edit it now. Because like, I'm not going to scrutinize their work as much as I scrutinize my work. And if it's better than I would have done, I'm happy. But I think that 4-to-1 ratio has rang true for me, at least.
I was thinking about my numbers. That sounds pretty right to me if I'm just thinking about after the episode. Mm-hmm. There's also time before the episode, planning the guest, setting lights, setting up your audio each time you're going to record, dealing with no-shows. There's all these other elements that happen beforehand because not every person, it's not easy to get every guest you want. Not every guest you reach out to is going to work out. Not every episode you record is going to be releasable. There's all these other little pieces that go in there. Probably I release most of my, like almost all of my episodes, but I definitely have every year 2 to 5 that don't get out the door. At the end of it, I go, I got to think about it. to do a heavy re-edit to see if there's anything usable here, or I just can't use this one. When you start adding that in, I feel like it pushed that ratio up. And even if you have someone else edit it, there's still all the other little pieces. Like it's really hard for an editor to choose the right clips. You have to make this video clips. I find that where most people fall down, and you tell me if this is your experience, when you appear on someone's podcast, they always say they're going to send you like social media clips and a notification, and then they never do.
Yeah. That is, I'm going to put that at 70% of people who say they're going to send me. It's 20% of people who say they're going to send me social media assets do. And then 70% who say they're going to send me a notification that the episode is live do. Because that's the easier part, right? Hey, your episode's live. Can you share it? I automate that, obviously. Like I was a WordPress developer in a previous life. And so I have a little plugin that when the post publishes, it sends an email to the guest. But like that, I'm not sending them assets or images or anything because I'm not really creating them myself.
So here's the thing about that. There's two parts. The first is that they never share them. So no guest. And when I say this to guests, they go, no, I'm the one who will share it. I'm like, okay, I'm going to look at your Instagram right now. Am I going to see a bunch of pictures of you on different podcasts? Then do not PM me and tell me that it's raining.
Yeah.
I don't mind. I've just realized that's a really bad. I don't know why that's in every podcasting course. That's why every podcaster thinks that's the methodology, is that I'll send you clips and then nobody really wants to share clips of your stuff on their feed. They just don't. There are a lot of other things that you can do. I have found that if I post a clip and tag the person, sometimes they'll do a reshare. And that's a much softer touch. It's a lot less friction.
Yeah. Much lower lift for them.
Yeah, and it can really work. And I have a lot of other strategies that I implement, but one of them, I love writing about email automation. The thing that I do is when I run an automation, I'm using an if this then that plugin or tool that I set it up, and it has a date for when the episode's coming out. And so a week before the episode comes out, they get your episode's coming a week notification. Then there's a 7-day delay. Then your episode came out today. Then there's a 30. Your episode came out a month today. Just a reminder, it was a month ago. Maybe you want to share it again. And then there's a 6 month. It's all, and I used to have it with 4 triggers that I had to manually update each spreadsheet and would send out that week's email.
Right.
And I go, not smart of me. I need to make it all one trigger because the dates are locked in. Once I know the date episode's going out, the rest of it's fixed.
Yeah.
So I changed the trigger so that all the emails go out based on 1 week before the live date, and I don't have to do anything. Everything happens automatically, and I can schedule it months in advance because I am a forgetful person. And the other thing I said in is that it sends me a copy of each email that goes out. So that it just fills in 4 variables. Here's a link to your episode. Here's a link to a folder that I put social media images in sometimes. And here's a link to the episode on YouTube. Here's a link to the episode audio file. So they have it. And that now the emails go out, because before it was something I was so forgetful about. And that's the thing, is because doing a podcast is so much harder than you think. Those are the things that drop off. The things that the marketing is what gets lost.
Yeah.
And I was talking to someone a few months ago whose dad was really famous, and then his dad is no longer around. His dad passed away, and then he got forced out of his dad's business. Who knows how that happened? And he was like, I'm really trying to restart things. So I've been on 40 podcasts in the last month. Do you have any of your podcasts? I was like, definitely not. When you tell me you've been on 40 podcasts in the last month, I know that I will get no bump from you appearing on my show. You're not a unique guest, and that you're just going to repeat yourself. It makes you so much less attractive. I think this is a huge mistake people make as guests, right? Telling everyone, I've been on a bunch of podcasts in the last month, and I've said the exact same thing on all of them. That means that there's no value for my audience. They're not going to get any lift from your appearance either.
Yeah. And they're not going to get any lift if you do share it, right? Because if your audience is like, if you're sharing every episode you've been on in a month to your audience and you're saying the same thing, your audience isn't going to listen. Like, they've already heard your story.
You're definitely not sharing it. That's the person who's 100% not. Come on. But that's the thing, is every time I'm on a show, they always say, what questions do you want me to ask? I go, no, you don't want that. You ask me questions, so that way you're asking me questions and I give you different answers. I have 40 different ways of telling my story because everyone asks for that. Because as a guest, that's what I'm thinking about. I want, if someone hears me on multiple podcasts, for you to get different good experiences.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with that. When I get like give me 5 questions to ask you, then I'm like, I don't know your audience. I don't know what your audience values. And I just can't, I'm not going to come up with questions presumably as good as you do for your audience. So let's just have a conversation. Let me know what your audience wants to take away. And then in turn, I will give those answers that are best suited for your audience.
Yeah. And if all I'm doing is giving everyone the same questions, it's so boring for me. Like some guests I have are like, they just want me to ask the pre-written questions. Like, this is the conversation you've had 60 times.
Right. Yeah.
Why not just simply clip answering someone else with the same thing? And people forget on a core level, podcasting is entertainment. And you have to create unique content, special content, and think about, before you think about yourself, whether you're the guest or the host, is the audience experience. Because sometimes you get those guests who constantly say the name of their product so much that you can't use the episode anymore.
Yep, been there.
It's like, you have to understand that if I leave you in and I post that episode, that it's going to hurt my credibility. And the listeners is going to go, why is he letting this person do this? Right. So I either have to edit it out a bunch, which I'm like, I'm not doing that. Or I have to just nuke the episode or shout at you, like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
And it's not my job to teach you how to be a nice person or teach you how it works. But I feel like a lot of people kind of shortcut. And the next thing, just think about this, is that every guest who has the same story. Oh, I left corporate America to start my own business. Wow. I've never heard that story before. I love it. Like, people, if you don't put in the effort to be unique, it makes it harder and harder for me to sell that story, because I can't have, that's the same episode week after week.
Right. Yeah.
So can you talk about, your big thing is process before automation. What is the right process for getting guests for your show? Because a lot of people are passive, and I think there's an assumption of passivity. I think because I get so many emails saying, oh, I know you're desperate for guests. I found the perfect person for you. Like, they must think that it must work on some shows, right? There must be some shows that do no effort into choosing their guests. But what do you think is the right process, or how much time should someone put in before an episode into choosing the right guest, researching the guest, planning that out, that process, so that when the guest shows up, they can create a great episode?
Yeah, I love this question. And it really leads well into what you were talking about before, because you said podcasting is entertainment. 78% of people listen to a podcast to learn something new. And hosts should know that. The people who are going on 40 podcasts a month think that they're almost like a press junket. Have you ever seen those videos of all of the Avengers press junkets, like all in a row? And like, they're getting the same questions from different reporters with a different backdrop. And that's so that the reporters and the channels can use their own copyright stuff, right? That's not what a podcast is. And you shouldn't treat a podcast like that. So as a host, I do a couple of things, right? In the pre-show, I was telling you a little bit about my guest onboarding, or my guest application process. And there are a few screening questions there. And I always look for, when I'm getting pitched, what's in it for my listeners, right? I don't care how great you are. Tell me how great you are at the end. I want to know if you have my listeners in mind. When I'm doing the research and I'm looking for guests, I'm usually looking for maybe people who I've interacted with, where I've seen post something cool on social media, either LinkedIn or whatever Twitter is going to be called for the next couple of years, or now Threads, or wherever, right? Wherever I'm hanging out. And I'll reach out to those folks and say, hey, I saw you posted about this. I'd love to expand upon that with my audience, right? One of my guests coming up is Gia Laudy. She and her co-author, Claire, wrote a book called Forget the Funnel. And they have a whole chapter on jobs to be done. And I'm like, I've never talked about jobs to be done on my podcast. And I think that's a really important thing to think about, especially if you're a solopreneur who's trying to improve your processes. So she's going to come on and talk like specifically about that. And so the research part of it, and I know I've been talking a lot, so I'll wrap up, but the research part of it for me is what's their unique point of view? What can my audience get from this? What interesting questions can I ask them? And I want to know a little bit about their background and who they're talking to. because I used to be like, I just want to learn with the audience, right? That was like very green, Joe's rookie season. Oh, I want to be surprised with my audience. And then I thought that's like driving with a blindfold on. You will get to a destination somewhere in your car, but wouldn't it be better if you knew where you were going so that you can then efficiently drive your audience there? So I think I want to know enough to guide the audience and have very clear outcomes without it sounding too much like a documentary or something like that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, there's that balance between over scripting and under scripting. And a lot of shows, I can always tell how much prep if someone's done too little because they have no idea who I am sometimes. I'm like, I didn't even go through an agency. Like I booked with you directly.
Right.
We emailed back and forth. They don't remember me, or they mix up with other guests, or and their first question is about the title of my book. Then the next question is about the subtitle. And it's, why are you here if you don't have a little bit of a plan? And you don't have to have a huge plan. Like I probably do an hour of prep for each episode,
right?
Maybe 30 minutes to an hour. Depends on the person. I've already interacted with you a couple of times. So as soon as I looked up your website, I go, oh yeah, I remember what I wanted to talk about because I had some notes about that. But if it's a guest that I booked 3 months ago, some people book so far in advance. I don't know why. I have openings every week, but they'll book 5 months out. I'm like, okay, guess you're a superstar. I need an hour to kind of prep and have an hour buffer. So it's not a huge amount of time, but I'll write down a couple of questions. And then the thing for me is that I'll have 6 to 10 questions that I want to ask, and I'll probably ask 2 of them because you're going to say something that surprises me. I'm like, oh, let's drive down that road. If they don't say something that surprises me, I have enough of a plan. I have a backup plan. Like I've been watching a lot of these air disaster debriefs where they talk about what went wrong and how you plan for it. And I'm like, very fascinating because a lot of the times they didn't prepare like a backup airport in case something goes wrong. They didn't prepare for if they have to circle the airport and re-land again. It's so much that it's almost always that.
Wow.
That they didn't do certain things that they could have done before the plane took off. And it's just a reminder because pilots are the greatest example of process and checklists. Like before you take off a plane, there's a checklist. And there's a big book with every plane for every emergency. You flip to that page and you follow the checklist for whatever happens. Left engine goes out, follow this checklist. Right engine goes out, follow this checklist. Both engines out, follow this checklist. And there's always a procedure because it massively decreases the number of mistakes. It's only when people stop following the procedures they have problems. And I think I told you that I read this book called The Checklist Manifesto, which was just about and it's not about a checklist of what tasks to do today. It was a checklist of here's the 5 things we do before every surgery. And they made a checklist for that. And like hospitals in the worst countries in the world, is like the least supplies, their infection rates dropped about 90 to 95%. And it was so revelatory for me that, just make a checklist of what you do before and after each process. It doesn't have to be long, but it has to be something that one person says, another person listens to, and so it's out loud, just like the co-pilot reads it to the pilot. That actually makes a huge difference. It's not just one you memorize. Because whenever you say it inside your head, and you don't have it written down in our reading, you always forget something. You read 6 out of the 7 steps, you do something out of order, just natural. It's a very simple lesson for a book. I was like, this book teaches one tiny thing with 55 examples. Really interesting. Someone turned it on to me. I go, that's got to be silly. But I read it and I was like, oh my gosh, it's a very simple idea, because the biggest mistake I believe solopreneurs make is they don't write down their process. Then they try to hire someone and try to explain the process. And the person doesn't know the steps and they don't know what the goal is. So it's really hard. They don't know the metric of success and they don't know those micro steps, because it's really hard when you don't have your process written down. And when you do it slightly different each time, you're like, it's more art than science. Then you have a non-replicable process and you can't find efficiencies. So the reason I have you on here today to talk about is that because this is where I think podcasters fail, is like after you do the episode, you're like, oh my gosh, there's so much more work than I thought. So the first part is editing the episode. It's hard.
Yep.
There's a lot of mechanics. Now you have to edit and create a video and an audio version. After that, you have to create show notes, show description, all those other little pieces that go with it. You have to schedule the show with your podcast host. And there's more and more things that are like offering services to fill in those gaps. So that stuff is becoming easier with AI tools, but you still have to have a process. For example, I'll give you a really simple one. If you use one of those clip services like Video or Opus, and you upload the final episode of your show, which has your intro music, your outro, and the commercials, it will always pick the intro music and the outro music in a commercial. So you end up with a bunch of, so you have to upload an earlier version of your podcast, or you'll end up with all of that trash. And and all of them do it. They all always go, oh, the best part of your show is the intro music. I'm like, you stupid AI.
Right. You're going to say something. They assume that you're going to say something interesting in the beginning to hook the listener. And then they assume that story format that we were talking about, except if you have intro music and you have mid-roll ads, and then you have the whole outro. Thanks for listening. Subscribe, click on this link, leave a friend and a like or whatever. It's making the wrong assumptions. And so it's grabbing the wrong parts.
It's also when your voice is the most high energy.
Oh, yeah.
And there's music going on. This is the most exciting part of the whole show. It's the only part with music.
Yeah.
So I think doing something else when it's picking those clips, but that is absolutely like part of my process is knowing that I have to do it at that. So these are those little micro steps. Another example is that I used a script to do the final edit of my episodes. However, it has an audio enhance tool. That's the best audio enhance. I tested everyone's in a big YouTube video. If I audio enhance after I've added the music, it erases the music because it erases anything talking because it thinks an episode should only have talking. So it does the opposite. This episode should have no music. It'll just delete music out. It'll be a while to figure out why it was doing that. So now I know you have to do the audio enhance and then add the music. So I had to learn how to add the music script. So it's a process and it's a series of steps. And that's the only way to achieve efficiency is to write down your steps and have a really good set of steps. And then the next part is the only way to get faster and faster. Then the only way to add automation is once you have that process in place, because otherwise you will automate the wrong things. A lot of people make this mistake with AI of trying to do the really cool stuff. Like a friend of mine yesterday was like, how can I use an AI to make really cool videos? I was like, you can't. You just can't. I was like, it's the worst approach you can make because this is a rabbit hole. There's now this like software that will make AI podcasts. So you like make an AI video podcast. Someone was asking about it. I was like, this is a terrible idea. It's just like, you're only going to get a really small number of people who don't care. I can get super engaged people. And it's just like the effort that goes into it. If you actually care about the content, it's more effort to make what the AI is going to say than there is to do to actually just record an episode. So you might as well just record an episode. The only thing that would be cool is this is what I would like, is if an AI took these two videos of you and me and made it look like we're in the same room. That would be cool.
Yeah. And I just saw a video on that, like how to do that, but like it requires like heavy green screens and lots of space. That's the only way today that you could do that.
We both have to have perfect lighting. You're the first guest I've had in so long that even shoots in 4K. Most guests show up, they're shooting like 720 or 360. Yeah. You show up, they're like, oh, this is webcam that came on my laptop in 1977. What? Webcam only shoots in black and white. So
yeah. And that's a huge deal. I know you didn't have me on for this, but if you're going to make content, especially video content, you need maybe not 4K. I recommend 4K in 2024 though. Sorry, I just timestamped your episode. And like good lighting. Like I've got 3-point lighting that I'm controlling with a Stream Deck. And that's so important because it's going to put the focus in the right places.
Yeah, that's one of my pet peeves is like when people are on the news, like they have their big break, they're on CNN or MSNBC or Fox News, whichever one you watch, and they have like their headphones in and like the crappiest audio and it's like super glitchy and bad. And it's like, wow, you really don't care.
Yeah.
Like you have such a level of disdain for the show that's booked you, and the show should be ashamed of themselves. Why do you have a $10 million studio and then you're shooting someone who's in like $14 webcam? If you're not going to set a team out to record the person, like what are you doing? That's what they used to. They would set a crew to make the lighting and everything right. Yeah. Now they don't do that anymore. It looks so trash.
Yeah, it's like it's like they were like, oh, we don't have to do this anymore since the pandemic. But like the takeaway shouldn't have been that. It should have been like, is there a kit that we can send people so we don't have to send out a crew? But still make your guests, don't go to a 5-star or a 5 Michelin star restaurant or whatever, 3 Michelin star, whatever the highest one is, in sweatpants. Don't go on CNN looking like you're recording from a cave.
Yeah. But people think, oh, I saw someone on CNN, I can do it on this podcast. The number of guests I get who show up and go, hey, this is audio only. I'm sorry. You think this is 10 years ago? Are you crazy? Which podcast do you know that's audio only? There's a few left, but not big ones, not successful ones. It's just over. And it's not a lot of effort. Like lighting, you're talking about $200 to set up enough lights, and 2 lights on you is $200. $100 light, you can have a good setup. You don't need a lot of money but people don't put it in. They just get super lazy. Oh, I'm just going to use the webcam in my phone. So it's at an upward angle. You're looking at my nose the whole time. It's the wrong dimension. It really does matter to the audience. Again, the audience, like I have to deal with matching my brightness to the guest brightness. All of those things matter. So it goes dark light. Now it feels like it's like a flashing police light, right? With two different brightness. All of these elements matter. And part of it, it's that pre-show checklist of turn on these lights, check the sound, and pre-check the audio, log into the show 5 minutes early. All of these things, because something goes wrong. I had a friend I was doing a live stream with a couple weeks ago, and what happened? He tried to log in 2 minutes early, and then he had clicked on his browser, no permission for camera and microphone. He didn't know how to undo that. I don't know how to undo that because I've never known.
Yeah.
So both turned off, and I was like, I'm not letting you into the stream. The stream's already started. I'll just do it without you. I'm not doing tech support while I'm live. And that's part of the game. And then we had an issue this week. My browser crashed in the middle of it. So he logged out and never came back so that we could then check my side. He's like sending me DMs in a chat thing I didn't have open. I was like, it's so stressful when you work with someone who just doesn't think possibly they could help you solve the solution. I was like, if the problem was still happening, I thought you'd DM me. I'm like, you could have also gone into the live stream as a listener and let me know that it was still broken. There's a lot of ways we could have solved this if we worked as a team. But so it was like one time the second one was my fault. My browser crashed, lesson learned, but because we logged in 30 minutes early that time to make it all work. But all of these things can be solved with process before and afterwards. So that's really your specialty. So I just want to give you a chance to shine and explain what your approach is to process development and why you think people should bring in an external process instead of trying to invent their own process for these things.
Yeah, such a great question. And I think like the Checklist Manifesto was a book I used to dump on too, because every business book after it was written mentioned it at some point, I felt. But it's one of those things where it was so ingrained in me, but people never heard of it. Like my wife just brought it up recently. She's a nurse and she's like, do you know about this book, The Checklist Manifesto? And I'm like, yeah. She's like, yeah, I think I'm going to read that. And I'm like, definitely. And they have checklists, obviously, but like having that perspective and the stuff behind it is really good. And people just, when they're doing something, they fly by the seat of their pants. So what I'll do is I'll do something. If I'm doing something for the first time, maybe not the first time, like the second time, I will write down like what I'm doing it as I'm doing it. Or now that I have a VA, I will record myself doing it. And then I will have her transcribe the video and write out the steps. That way she knows exactly what needs to happen. Because as you said earlier, people don't necessarily know the goals. And if you're hiring somebody for like strategy, then they're going to make the goals too. But like my VA, she needs very clear inputs and outputs, right? I asked her to, just find me conferences to speak at. That was the worst. What kind of conferences am I willing to travel? What am I going to talk about? And that was my bad, right? Because I thought that she had a level of understanding for what I did that she didn't. And so then the next time I was like, I'm looking for conferences in this area or virtual within these dates where I can talk about these three things. And the output was much better. And then I recorded it. Here's how I go about finding conferences or whatever. But so now my VA, we have the handbook, right? We have a whole bunch of SOPs. For people who don't have a VA yet, or they're like just starting on this journey, I usually give them like 4 questions or 4 kind of tasks to answer, right? Which is number 1, make a list of everything you do. When you're doing your podcast, make a list every time you work on your podcast. So it's not just, I find a guest and then I invite the guest. No. What do you do before you find the guest, right? How do you find the guest? How do you come up with topics to talk about? And then when you invite them, do you email them and say, hey, join my podcast? Or do you send them a Calendly link? What happens after they get that Calendly link? What happens to the information after they get that Calendly link? Is the information going from Calendly to Trello or Notion or Airtable or whatever? What's the follow-up? Like, those are the things, literally every step. If you feel like you're being too granular, you're not.
So I talked to a guy who teaches macros once. He said a macro is a recipe that every time you push the button, it works. It has to be so detailed. He said one of the ways I teach people is I say, write down how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And they always start off with, well, Pick up a piece of bread and start putting peanut butter. He goes, where'd the bread come from? Where'd the peanut butter come from?
I love
How'd
that.
you bag stored? And I was like, that's really interesting because most people, like you were intimating, is that they don't break it down into small enough steps to an actual replicable recipe. And we sometimes give really big picture things. Like I've started using this tool called Scribe that takes a screenshot every time you click your mouse button or push a button on the keyboard. And it is crazy because then you get this, and I always get in trouble because you can only have 250 steps. And the reason I like this is because I'm like doing too many things. But once I know I'm making a scribe, it makes me be more efficient. It actually forces efficiency. And then you can go back, you have to go back through and edit it every time. And that's what I had to learn how to do, was to be good at editing the scribes, because you'll have way too many steps, but it's so much easier than having way too few. And then I'll either reshoot it. I go, oh, it's easier to reshoot this than to click delete 250 times. But it does force you to think about efficiency and think, okay, I'm just teaching a process. I don't want to teach theory because I want to create a replicable process here. And it changes the way I do things. And it's different because I've used a lot of different screenshot tools. This one, what I like about it is that I can give a link to each different scribe and it's living. So I can go back and update it. So I have it in a course teaching a process. Every time I change the process, I can just update the scribe and I don't have to update links anywhere, update
Nice.
a PDF. And no matter what, each customer has access to the most current version. I was like, oh, now I get the subscription thing. Because normally I'm like, if I need a subscription, I can just download them and cancel it. But now they've got me because I saw that element. I was like, that's really cool.
Yeah.
Because I only have to update one place, even if I deploy the SOPs for different courses in different places. So I can give the same SOP to a bunch of different people for different things. So that's when you do that and actually see what you do, it's so surprising.
Yeah, absolutely. I really love the recipe. I'm going to steal that. But something else
Good,
that
right?
I thought about as you were talking was, I interviewed a guy on my podcast. His name is Josh Burnoff, and it's like how to actually write a good business book. And he says most people make an outline. If they do that when they're writing a book, they make an outline and then they start writing. And he said, you need to make what's called a fat outline. So write your outline and then go back to each item and fill in a bunch of stuff in there. And that's almost the same thing, right? If you can only think in like big steps first, fine, do that. Okay, I do research. I find a guest, I record with the guest, I edit, I publish. Then go back in and fill each of those things out. Because that is, once you have that, then you can understand, what can I hire out to have a VA to do? Do I personally need to do this? The answer is going to be no most of the time. Does a person need to do this? And if you believe the answer is yes, then that's when you find a VA. Or can a robot do this? Can AI or some automation tool do this?
Yeah, I think that we get so busy doing that we don't strategize very much. So I write a lot of books. Like I've written like 300 business books to myself and clients. 90% of the time is not me in front of the computer. I usually write the entire book in my head before I sit down at the computer, like to get a real feel for the flow. But I do what you said, which is I write an outline, then I call it a deep outline, but fat outline's the same thing where you go, it's a mind map. Yep. And I usually say to someone, you should be able to, they go, how do I know when an outline is done? And I go, great question. I go, you can stand up and dictate it and you don't have a single thought about what's next. You always know the next thing you're going to say. And you don't have to go, what did I mean by that? Or I say, if you're writing by hand, it's 500 words. So every 500 words, you have a waypoint, because 500 words is about a single page of a Word document. And when you have that, because what you don't want to do, and this is a different mindset, is to switch from creating to decision making, because those are two different parts of your brain. So if you get to a chapter and you go, this is where people get into, what's it called?
Writer's block?
Whatever the writer's block, that's it. I can't think of writer's block. That's ironic. You can't. And the reason that happens is you don't know what's going to happen next in the scene. It's always the result of that outline. And it's very interesting to see how that applies to process, because a lot of people, they can explain it, but they never break it down into details. And for each person, a different way of doing it's going to work. Either recording yourself with a Loom video, which is a great way to do it, That's why video recordings are so good, because it catches everything.
Right.
Sometimes people don't explain like the really tiny step. That's why I like to watch a video. Oh, they didn't mention this, but this is a really important. You have to click this box. Or exactly going back through. And one of the ways to do it is to say, if someone's never used a computer before, could they follow this instructions and get the same result you do every time? So we talk about things, maybe we don't do it anymore, about being idiot proof or being like fail proof. And I saw this t-shirt, someone said, I'm an engineer, my job is to make things idiot proof, but they keep making better idiots. And I was like, that's very funny.
Yeah.
But people always find a way to like really shock you and break it. But that's really what it means. And it can be very hard to develop a set of steps. So one of the cool things you can do is you can take one of those videos, feed it to an AI and say, turn this into a series of steps.
Yeah.
That's where things start to get really cool, because people don't always think, oh, I can use this as a middle step. These are places where it can help you. AI can help you to be strategic. You go, here's my process. Is there any steps missing? And it will go, well, how do you do this? So answer a really good question, because AIs are very methodical.
Yeah.
They're still computer programs. So there's a lot of things you can do where these two elements integrate, which is whichever part you're bad at, you can say, I'm trying to develop my process. It's this. Like today, I had an idea for a piece of software. And I told my idea to ChatGPT, and it gave me like a really complicated solution. And I go, what if I do these 3 things? He goes, oh, then it's 2 steps. So you do have to go back and forth, because it doesn't always first choose the easiest path. It choose the path that is the coolest, I think. If this is the coolest way to build as a full stack developer, you have to bring in a private coder. And I was like, what if I just use WordPress and a plugin that just does this? They're like, oh yeah, you could do that. I was like, not your first choice, like the free plugin version, right? But that's really where you have to combine your specialized knowledge with the AI's generalized knowledge. And you can go back and forth and say, I'm developing a process for this. What are my steps? 'Cause I'm always working on writing out my podcasting process and refining it, because I lose momentum. If I have to spend over a certain amount of time editing an episode, I lose a lot of the energy. So I know for me, for a 25, 30-minute episode, it's about 2 hours, which is a 4X.
Yeah.
To get the episode ready, including finding some clips. And a lot of that is just jumping between tools, because first I output the first version of the episode. My AI will go back and forth over who it shows. Whoever's speaking will show that person's face. That used to be something you had to do manually. That's a huge time saver. But then I have to go in with another tool, send one off to clips. And then the other tool is I add in the intro music and the outro music and name the episode. Then you got to think of a name, the description for YouTube. Then you have to have the description for the podcast episode. All these other parts, most of those are done by AI for me now, because I have a process. But I have to read it to make sure it doesn't do something crazy, because it will go off track. If you don't read it, it will give like a really bad podcast description the one time you don't read it. So there's always that human involvement. But even with a lot of AI stuff, it still takes you about 2 hours, which is about as efficient as you can get. And I switched from having someone else edit my episodes to me, because I'm like, most of it is done by AI now. And then I edit by reading it, so I can read the episode to see if there's anything I want to cut out. Most of the time there's not, but every once in a while it's quick. But most of it can be done by automation. That's remove awkward silences,
Right.
remove anytime someone says like a filler word, and you're getting pretty close. The problem is that my tool, I use a script, it thinks is a filler word. But at the end of the show, I say, hit the heart if you liked the episode, and it always wants to cut that out. So there's a use case where it's not a filler word. So that's one of the things I have to go through and check. But most of the time, the editing can be done very quickly these days because of the automation tools, but it's only because I developed a process. And I just realized that farming it out, it has a longer turnaround time, and I just need to have that short turnaround time so that it's just done and I can move it across the board. Let me ask you that. How many people who have a podcast have a process for tracking where an episode is, like a Kanban board or even a spreadsheet? What percentage of people have that?
Shockingly few, I think. This is anecdotal, right? I haven't done like industry research on this, but like every time I have a conversation with a podcast, I'm like, tell me about your process. And they're like, all right, like I'll book with them via email. We'll pick a time. And I'm like, have you considered Calendly? And they'll be like, or SavvyCal or whatever, right? And they're like, oh, no, okay, so maybe I'll use that. And I'm like, where does the information go after? And they're like, oh, I usually just make a Google Doc. And I'm like, okay, but like, how do you know where in the process, right, it is? How do you know? I'm just like working on each episode week to week. And I'm like, this is why you'll pod fade, right? Because you'll get to a point where you're sick or you're on vacation and you don't have an episode. And then you think, I missed 1 week, so it's okay for me to miss other weeks. And then you just stop doing it because you haven't made time. And so I think it's one of the biggest things I do for people who hire me is we put this process in place. We don't do the time zone dance because the time zone dance is annoying and daylight savings time is coming up or is happening and or is rolling back and no one knows what time it is in Arizona in November. And like, there's just a lot of things are going on and a scheduling tool eliminates all of them. So that's like it's really, I think it's because like people don't understand their process. And so they don't really know what stages an episode can be at. And then they're working on one at a time. And so, I'm going to edit this one and now I got to record this one. And it can be a mess. And yeah.
Yeah. You have to have buffers. So you have to have enough episodes. Like I am always at least 10 to 15 episodes ahead. I stay that far ahead. Gives me some buffer so that if I get behind in editing or whatever, or if I get sick, the show doesn't collapse. When I first started out, I was a solo show doing 5 episodes a week and I had 40 episodes ahead. I was 40 episodes ahead. 20 episodes ahead. I had 20 buffer, I had a month of buffer. But then I got sick. Yeah. And that's it. When you're doing one every day, those episodes can get eaten up really fast. And that's when I realized this is just too intense, especially for it's all me every episode. So now I do an interview style like this once a week. And I was like, if I get 6 months ahead, then I'll just start doubling up and then I'll do 2 episodes a week. But that's the only, until I'm far, that way I'm still, don't lose that way I'm still 3 months ahead. It's the only way I would do it. But I love that you brought that up because a lot of people want that this episode is fresh and there's value to that, but there's a lot of risk to that because life happens. Anything can happen. The internet goes down. You can't upload an episode ever. And whatever it is, right? It's unexpected. You don't know what's going to happen. And then it really does. It's like missing the gym. Once you miss one day, it's easier to miss the second day. Mm-hmm. People, when you are supposed to release an episode and don't, people get an expectation of what time the episode's coming out.
Yeah.
So you can't do it. And this is something I'm dealing with right now because when I was uploading my YouTube video today for my YouTube channel, it recommended a different time. Yes, it recommended a different time every day. I'm like, this is making me crazy. So but I'm putting out an episode every day. So it's figuring out what's the best time is. But the regularity, I think, has a lot of value knowing, every day at 7 or every Thursday at 4 p.m. It doesn't matter. It's the same way we get used to a television show.
Yes.
This show's every Thursday night at 7:30 p.m. Regularity has a lot of value and it's about picking a time that you can maintain. But I think that this is very interesting to think about where people falter because there are so many podcasts now and they always have these really big eyes and really big dreams. And this podcast is going to change my life. And every once in a while, a podcast hits, right? But not very often. And there's so much work going on behind the camera that you don't see that is growing the show, whether it's connections or friendships or massive budget and investments. Those things really play more of a role than I think people realize. But the secret to any business is to treat it like a business. Every business is built on systems and processes. And when you want to accelerate, you want to grow, you either need more customers or raise your prices. You want to grow your podcast, you either to get stuff done faster, right? Or get bigger guests. And you can only get as big as you can get. It's not going to make that much of a difference. People don't really jump to see anyone in a podcast anymore because everyone is doing multiple episodes. You can see anyone 10 different places, no matter how famous they are. It's not like there's a recluse who does one podcast every 10 years. If you get someone like that's great, but it's very hard to get someone on the way up. So you have to find those other elements. And it is that process, consistency. And those are the hardest parts of business. People often think that my success is because I'm a genius. No, my success is just because I'm consistent.
Yeah.
It's that I put grind. I do it on slow days and I do it on big days. Guess what? I didn't want to do this today. I had to take 3 of my kids to the doctor tonight.
Oh, no.
It was a rough day. But you know what? I'm here because I'm consistent. It has nothing to do with you. I wanted to talk to you, right? We had a great chat beforehand, but life can get in the way where you go, whoa, today was a real rough one. But you have to show up and you have to perform. You have to be your on-stage self with a big old smile. And then you have to afterwards edit the episode and do all those other pieces and go, there's two parts to the business. Until you can hire a team to do everything. We see the shows with huge budgets. They have like 3 people in an editing room live. That's cool, but that's a huge budget. When you think about what those salaries are, that's probably costing hundreds of thousands of dollars a year just to have those people there, let alone the tech and what they're doing.
Yeah.
Like, there goes all your profits.
You mentioned I tried to do a daily podcast last year and it was really hard. And then you look at, here are 3 examples of daily podcasts, right? One is History Daily. Lindsey Graham is the host, not that Lindsey Graham. And then there's the Bulwark podcast, formerly with Charlie Sykes, now with Tim Miller. And then there's the Daily Dad or the Daily Stoic, both of them by Ryan Holiday. And if you listen to History Daily, there's a team of people that are mentioned in the credits. Research by this person, writing by this person, executive producing, audio engineering. That's how that show gets made. It's a deep like storytelling podcast. And it's daily, 5 days a week. Then the Bulwark podcast is hosted by Tim Miller, executive produced by blah, 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 special guest. There's multiple people there. Ryan Holiday, I don't think does credits at the end of his shows. His episodes are 5 minutes and he's basically just paraphrasing a chapter from his, like a page from his book. And honestly, I've noticed like the quality take a little bit of a hit on that one lately, if I'm being honest. But the point is these guys have teams and budgets. If you want your show to be fresh, right? The best news shows I listen to usually have a co-host. And when one of them is gone, the other one can take over and bring in a special guest. So it's a very different type of show. And if you're doing this for your business, then you want to give mostly timeless. Obviously, like the advice that I would have given in 2009 is different from now, but there's not really a ticking clock on the content that you're creating as a solopreneur for your podcast. And as long as you can do that, then yeah, you can get a bunch in the can, especially if you're pre-launch, to take advantage of when life happens. I couldn't record 1 week because my kid was homesick and like my wife was at work, and that would have just been a terrible recording because I was going to have to keep my kid occupied I wouldn't have been able to be present and on. And so we were able to reschedule, but I have a bunch in the can so that the people listening can form that habit of knowing they can listen on their Monday morning commute.
Yeah, that's really good. That's one of the secrets to doing an AI podcast is that I don't do news here. I do news on my other channel, but it has to be timely. And there are 3 types of episodes there. I have the evergreen episode. This can come on anytime. It's a universal principle or technique, like a prompting technique. There's the moderately timely, like it's a product review and you just want to release it before they do an update or something. And then there's the, I have to put this episode out today. So I was thinking today about I need to get, because I don't have any episodes in the can for that because I just made the commitment.
Yeah.
But it's pushing myself, but it takes me 2 to 3 hours a day to create that day's episode. Sometimes I can get a couple back to back, but I have to, there's also the thinking of what am I going to make a video about today thing. So it does put a lot of pressure on me. I have to figure something out and get ahead for exactly that reason, that it creates that buffer, because very rarely is an episode super timely. And then what I can do is if a timely one comes in, I can just push the one behind it back.
Yeah.
And that's really part of it. But I love what you're saying here. I think this has been really helpful for a lot of people who have been approaching podcasting with their eyes full of pies and then really struggling. Those are the people who have the best idea and then the most pain when the process hits. And sometimes people don't know how long things are going to take. Like I talked to someone recently and I was like, how long does it take you to get an episode edited in 12 weeks? I was like, what? Are you sending it by horse?
Yeah. On tape?
I was like, because I do it myself. The only reason like our episode won't be ready in 2 hours is if I just don't do it. If I have a bunch of back-to-backs or if something else is going on, it delays me, but it still is 12 weeks is such a huge amount of time. And I just wonder, because if I use a service, I have a service that I'll use sometimes. you're talking, and they're fine, but it's like a 5-day turnaround, and they're pretty solid, but 12 weeks must come back so good. So you getting an IMAX version?
Yeah, like 8K.
The thing, when people don't know, if you don't do yourself first and develop the process first, you don't know how long something should take. You don't know what good versus bad looks like.
You also don't know what to tell the person. If I hadn't edited my first couple of episodes, I would have never known what to tell my editor to be like, hey, this is what I like, this is what I don't like. Like, you don't know.
Because there are things that bother me and things that don't, and things that I want fixed and things that I don't care about. And everyone is different. And until you do a little bit yourself, then you also can't tell if the person is taking too long or dipping quality or they're paying someone else to do it. There's a lot of things that can happen if you don't have the ability to do any level of quality control. So you're exactly right. I think this has been a really cool episode. We've gone way longer than I intended. This is like double the length of the normal episode. So I definitely want to bring it in for landing for our listeners who've hung out this far. Joe, where can people hang out with you, get to know more, see more about your process, and help them to start to understand just the idea of systems and processes for their business where they just follow a series of steps so they can get the same result over and over again?
Yeah, I think the best place is head over to casabona.org/Jonathan. It'll be casabona.org/Jonathan. And there you'll be able to get on my mailing list, find places to follow me, and you'll get a copy of my automations database, which is like 40 plus and growing automations. So I think that's the best place to do it. And yeah, I'm on all the socials as J Casabona.
Amazing. I know everyone's going to love this episode because we had a good time. The more fun I'm having, the more fun the listeners have. Thank you so much for being here. As always, guys, I appreciate you being here and listening to the Artificial Intelligence Podcast. Thanks for listening to today's episode. Starting with AI can be scary. ChatGPT Profits is not only a bestseller, but also the missing instruction manual to make mastering ChatGPT a breeze. Bypass the hard stuff and get straight to success with ChatGPT Profits. As always, I would love for you to support the show by paying full price on Amazon. But you can get it absolutely free for a limited time at artificialintelligencepod.com/gift. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Artificial Intelligence Podcast. Make sure to subscribe so you never miss another episode. We'll be back next Monday with more tips and tactics on how to leverage AI to escape that rat race. Head over to artificialintelligencepod.com now to see past episodes, leave a review, and check out all of our socials.